Before you head into production, you're going to want to make sure your entire scene is optimized just to make sure that everything is going to go smoothly. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my viewport options and I'm going to turn on FPS. So right now I'm at 20 to 19 frames per second inside of this scene. Now, this is a pretty complex scene. We have foliage going all the way into the distance being lit by volumetric light. We have a lot of high quality meshes here. We have Quixel assets. There's just a lot of stuff going on. Now, one thing that you can do, because my system, is sort of a mid-range system. I'm not working on an incredible dedicated workstation here. This is my home PC. I have a 1080 Ti. I have 32 gigs of RAM, and my CPU, quite frankly, is a little bit old. But if I were to be having a lot of issues here, I can always, just while I'm working, go to my engine scalability settings and change it to something other than cinematic. I could either auto detect it, or maybe I could work high or medium. This way, by the time I'm ready to render, I can bump it back up to cinematic. And if I'm doing a non-interactive version of this scene, if I'm actually rendering it through Sequencer, it's actually going to render it out in cinematic quality. So you might not be getting a completely real-time render of your scene, but at the very least, while you're working inside of this environment, you can still iterate rapidly. The other thing that I'd like to focus on here that can sometimes help me is the level of detail, the literal LODs on all of these static meshes that occur throughout the scene. For objects in the far distance, like say these mountains, if I go into the details panel and I type in LOD, I can force an LOD model for the distance models here, because the difference between that and its LOD of 1 is not visible because it's so far away. So for models way off in the distance, I can force this to be a much higher number. Even this Quixel Megascan asset right here, I've set to 2, opposed to its LOD of 0, because it's not super close to the camera. So I don't mind if I'm losing a little bit of the detail on that. Now, I might not want to go all the way to 4 there, but 2 seems to be the sweet spot, and it's going to open up some resources for me. But these are a couple of the processes that you can go through. So I've essentially changed almost all of these mid-ground ones that don't have too much of the attention on them to have an LOD model of 4. Now, the up-close items here, like if I'm inside of my shot, and I'm looking at the closer items here, I'm going to make sure that those remain consistent, set at 0. But even these large tree actors, these spruces, I've put to 2 because, I'm not really noticing that big of a difference here. If you want to check out how many LODs exist on your static mesh, what you can do is in the details panel or through your content browser here, you can navigate to where the static mesh is, double click on it, open it up inside of the editor, and you can actually preview this here under the LOD picker. So right now, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. And you see it get more and more simplified here as we go through the list. So if I had something in the very far background, I definitely would be setting this at LOD 4. For anything close up, I'm going to say 2 to 0 is going to be what I'm going to be working with here. If you're an asset creator, you'll be creating the LODs in your outside 3D modeling program. But if you're using marketplace content, always make sure to check and see if those LODs are available. And like I said, you can strategically start placing them or using them throughout your scene. If you wouldn't like to do this in another DCC, you can also manually generate LODs inside of Unreal Engine. We'll provide the links to that documentation for you to check out if that's the workflow you'd like to use. One more thing that you can use to try to get your frame rate to be a little bit more stable is you can change the actual source resolution of any texture inside of your scene. To do this, navigate to the static mesh, click on its material, and open up its texture file. Or of course, you can do that through the content browser. What you can see here is that our imported texture for this mossy rock from the Icelandic Quixel Megascans pack, the imported resolution is 8K, the displayed resolution is 8K, the maximum in-game resolution is also 8K. If I wanted to, I could adjust the MIP levels here, and I could set this to 4. And you'll notice that our displayed resolution changes here. And if we want to lower this even more, we can go to the advanced settings here under our maximum texture size, and we can enter this value as well. And once this processes, this always takes a second, you'll notice that our max in-game size changes as well. But of course, this texture now is incredibly muddy. So let's set that back to default. If you're still struggling to understand some of the reasons why your frame rate's taking a hit inside of the engine, here are some engine tools that you can check out, along with links to their documentation. These include the Unreal Insights tool, the GPU Profiler tool, and the CPU Profiler tool. One last thing you can do to try to get your frame rate up is, of course, decide how dense is your foliage. Does it need to be this dense? This is one thing that gets a lot of people, and it's kind of tricky. So I'm going to go into the foliage mode here. These are the instances of the various foliage that I have spread throughout this scene. And within that, if I want, I can go in and maybe the stuff that's at 11.9K, that many instances, maybe I don't need that many instances. So I can select that and, maybe go in and holding down Shift, I can start reducing the amount there. You'll notice that especially in large, massive landscapes, the amount of foliage you have going off into the distance, there's a couple tricks that you can do to sort of cover that up, including materials themselves, which will mimic foliage in the distance. But I've found that cleaning up the amount of foliage that you have, like the amount of actual instances, goes a long way to increasing your frame rate. Once again, all of these techniques, though, are really up to you, because if you're doing a movie export from Unreal, you're not going to be dropping any frames. It's going to be exporting. Now, it's not quite 100% real time then when you're exporting, because there is going to be a little bit of a delay. It's orders of magnitude faster than exporting with this level of visual fidelity in other cinematic programs used for completely computer-generated filmmaking.